I was reviewing another book, actually, and came across a series at Yale called Why X Matters, and they were short books, quite compelling on a variety of topics. And so I thought, gee, maybe I could write a short book, because I didn't think I had time to write a big one, on why liberal education matters. And I tracked down the name of the series editor, Eileen Smith, at the time, and suggested this to her. And she was a little worried that Yale might think, well, gosh, it's a good idea. Maybe Rick Levin should do it, because he's, at the time, was president and a great guy, and he has written interesting things over the years. But she was very helpful. We crafted a book proposal a few summers ago, and I thought, maybe a summer or two I could be able to finish the book, which involved considerably more research than I had first anticipated. The argument of the book is that liberal education has deep roots in American culture and society, and the tension between liberal education and vocational education goes back to the founding of the United States. It goes back further than that, but in our country, you can find some of the debates that we're having around liberal education were debates that were current at the time of Thomas Jefferson or Ben Franklin. And so that was interesting to me as a historian. I thought, people talk about this stuff as if it's because of the internet or it's because of high tuition today as opposed to 20 years ago. But even 200 years ago, people were having very similar conversations. Even to the point where, Jefferson was writing a letter about the difficulty of controlling the inebriated students he had on weekends who were throwing rocks at professors' homes. It all sounded too familiar. Not the rocks at professors' homes, thank goodness, but those challenges. And so Yale Press was interested, and I got a literary agent, George Borchard, who's a great guy and was helpful as I kind of formulated the ideas for the book. In fact, George's daughter, Valerie, went to Wesleyan, as I learned later, and so they've been a helpful participant as I put together the research for the book. And what I wanted to do was to show that liberal education was relevant today, but it also had deep historical roots in America, and not the same roots as liberal arts education in Europe, which is a little different and tied to specific subjects. I wanted to make an argument for liberal education that wasn't tied to disciplines, but actually a mode of thinking and an approach to any discipline that you were interested in. Well, I discovered writers that I didn't know about. I'm a European historian, and most of my work in the last many years has been focused on French things, especially around psychology and philosophy. And so I started to do some research on debates around the founding of the University of Virginia, which was fascinating, and also around issues of financial aid at the time, because Jefferson talked about, or what he called, raking the rubbish for very talented people who had no money, and that they should be educated at the expense of the taxpayers. The taxpayers revolted against this idea. But he, even then, was conscious of the dangers of having an unnatural aristocracy, as he called it, an aristocracy of wealth rather than of talent. And that the way to break that was education, that you should provide talented people. It was a meritocracy. It wasn't everybody, but talented students should get scholarships to continue their education. And that their education should not be bound by the positions that their parents had earmarked for them when they start their college experience. At UVA, he really was conscious not making it not like Harvard, where he recognized, I should say, that students, they started their study and they were tracked. They were going to be a minister, or you were going to go into commerce, and that's what you did. The idea that Jefferson had is that you should explore intellectually what enlivens you, what makes you think more deeply about things, and then pursue that. And that you learn what to learn through education, rather than through somebody telling you should learn about God, or you should learn about commerce, or you should learn about farming, based on your family or your fate. That was very exciting for me. And then writing about the African American responses to Jefferson was also something that I found fascinating. David Walker, a free black who lived in Boston, a shopkeeper, wrote a stinging manifesto about Jefferson's racist hypocrisy. What was interesting to me was that he used the Jeffersonian understanding of education and extended it to blacks, which Jefferson didn't do. And it's powerfully written and, scared the pants off of people who were afraid that if blacks got an education, they would not be content to be in the service of whites. And Frederick Douglass made the same argument when he escaped from slavery. And so that was interesting to me. So there's a stream really about African American thinking about liberal education. And I spent some time with the debate between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. Washington, after the Civil War, arguing that, what blacks need is a trade, they need skills. And Du Bois saying, we may need skills, but we need a broad contextual education to be fully human. Again, that notion that education makes you fully human, and to relegate ex-slaves or their descendants to only one specific kind of trade was to not give them the benefit of exploring their own humanity. Du Bois argued around the turn of the century, and then throughout the 20th century. Jane Addams was another really interesting discovery for me. I mean, a lot of people know about Jane Addams already, but I didn't know much about her. I am very interested in pragmatism, and the theme of the book is really the emergence of pragmatic liberal education. So I knew I was going to write about Emerson, who's a hero of mine, and I knew I was going to write about William James, who I've written about a little bit before. But Jane Addams, suddenly, I see in the middle of this, and her critique of the kind of education that makes you incapable of acting or that makes you less capable of acting was so powerful to me, and her sense that some kinds of education make you hesitate to do anything because you have to think so much. And you start thinking about all the other people who thought about it, and you don't do anything. And Jane Addams was so interested in how, instead of that kind of education, you can have an education that energized your empathy or activated your sympathetic imagination, and that would actually make you more engaged person in the world through education rather than more distant person. And that, of course, mirrors some of the debates we've had here at Wesleyan, right, about the engaged university and how do you connect scholarship to action in the world. Someone I've worked on in the past is a historian named Michel Foucault, who argued that all history is history of the present. And others have made the point, too, that we always write history from the present. And this is a history written from the present. I mean, so most of the book is about American ideas of liberal education over the last 200 years. Maybe a quarter of it or less is just speaking directly about the present. But all of the history is written from my perspective of, being the president of a liberal arts university and as a teacher who prizes broad contextual learning. Here, I think in Beyond the University, I'm trying to articulate how understanding of our own history of education will give us courage to pursue a broad contextual and creative education in the future, and not give in to the folks who just want to either deprive some people of that kind of education or just steer us towards a pseudo practicality. So there's a kind of edge to the argument, which is that the folks who are emphasizing utilitarian education today, I think what they really want is conformism. They want people to conform to the status quo, and in a period of extraordinary change from technology and from cultural innovation, being wedded to the status quo is being faded to becoming a backwater and to be becoming less and less relevant, because you'll always be a step behind. What liberal educators have long known is that the most important thing is to learn how to learn, so that you can adapt in the future and that you can steer change rather than just always react to it. And there's an edge to this defense, because there's an attack on those people who would reduce education to narrowly utilitarian strands. At the same time, I also don't think you can just say, well, everybody should learn subject X because everybody used to learn that. I mean, whatever that subject is, it's Greek or it's Western Civ or something. What we want is to be able to show how to translate the things we learn on campus beyond the university. How to take what we learn while undergraduates beyond the college experience. And it's funny, when I started the project, the only thing I knew for sure was the title had to be Why Liberal Education Matters, because that was the series, Why X Matters. And then after I wrote the book, the sales force at Yale apparently said to my editor, who's now Steve Wasserman, an old friend from Los Angeles, they said to him, this series doesn't sell that well. We think this book can actually reach a broader public, so you don't need to use this title. I said, well, that's good news, except I've thought that's the only thing I've really ever thought about was the title. I thought I couldn't change it. And then, she said I had 24 hours to come up with a new title. So as I thought about it, it really, beyond the universities, because education is not about what you do while you're in college, right? Vic Butterfield famously said that if these are the best 4 years of your life, we failed you. And what he meant by that is that what you learn at the university should inform your life after, right, and beyond the university. So I thought it was a nice tribute to the Wesleyan tradition, the Butterfield tradition, to gesture at that ambition that the people who graduate from schools like Wesleyan will actually be lifelong learners. At Wesleyan, we're setting up a Center for Pedagogical Innovation. And the whole point of that is teaching should concentrate not on training professors. We shouldn't teach our students as if they were going to become faculty members, which has been a model in liberal arts institutions. You make believe you were going to become a historian or a classicist or a biologist. We should teach our students so that they become lifelong learners. Whether they become faculty members or business people or professionals or political workers, social justice people, whatever they do, they should be capable of learning so as to inform their lives with meaning and direction and to acquire skills that will help them get the job done. I do see this as a Wesleyan tradition. It's not only Wesleyan, but it is also a Wesleyan tradition, and I'm very proud to be part of. We have in America a healthy tension between the practical and the traditional. And that tension is important. I think that's why I call the kind of education I advocate for pragmatic liberal education. It's not to learn how to quote things or to learn how to impress people at cocktail parties or to participate in networks of esoteric conversation. Education should really be about finding ways to translate these experiences with books and with science, with events, translate that learning into what you're going to do with your life afterwards. And, Franklin is a great example. Ben Franklin, right? He was a great critic of the fancy education. He said, what did you learn at Harvard? You learn how to walk out of a drawing room backwards, and he was poked fun at all these fancy professors, and yet, he starts a book club of great seriousness. He starts the University of Pennsylvania. I mean, it's hard to find an American more devoted to lifelong learning than Ben Franklin. Experiment. That's his watchword. When you're experimenting, you're learning, right? That's what it's all about. And you're learning from your experience because you structure your experience in such a way that you can draw lessons from it. So Franklin, it's just you feel that ambivalence. I don't want snooty education, but I don't want stupidity, right? I want inquiry and I want community. That's the sweet American spot for education. So it's not about getting people into very exclusive clubs, which education, has had a tendency to do. It's about learning things that you can translate into action to be more effective. The pressure to be pragmatic is really healthy for liberal education. And that's why in America, I think our education has a different feel than France or Germany or England, because there is that pressure to be pragmatic. But pragmatism is also about self-transformation. It's also about the cultivation of experience and not just about narrowly, creating the next app on your iPhone. I think this tension is really healthy for educators. That's why I love these online classes that we've been doing at Wesleyan, because I interact with students from around the world who are unfiltered. And, our students here, they go through a very rigorous admissions process. And so they know how to talk in a certain way, they know how to interact in a certain way. They surprise us still, but sometimes in these conversations online, questions that seem to come out of left field actually create a new way of thinking about the subject area, whatever it is, whether it's poetry or history or, in my case, or philosophy. I think that pressure to show something is relevant is really great. And the reason I think it's so great is because I really believe it is relevant. I think that, if when we're reading Shakespeare, we could talk about how The Tempest actually shapes your thinking about race and about loneliness, let's say. Or in reading contemporary fiction, you learn things that are relevant to understanding history. As a teacher, I'm always asking my students to translate what we're reading, whether it's Hegel or Virginia Woolf, to translate something there. I put it into terms that would be relevant to your life right now, or relevant to something on campus. And because I think that shows that the books we're working with, the films we're working with, the paintings we're working with, the science we're working with, they're deep enough to reward reflection when you make the connections to the contemporary world. It's not about narrow expertise. It's about a resource for living and thinking. I think it's Levi-Strauss who said that some things are good to think with, it's not just that you learn about the object, you learn to think with that subject area or that object, and that really starts to inform your life. And I think that's very healthy for a liberal education. I'm a great believer in fluidity at universities. I don't like departments very much. I don't like specialization very much. On the other hand, I admire people who know a lot about something, that's of particular interest to them, but I admire them especially when they can show why they're interested in it and how that interest might be infectious in some productive way. I wrote a book on French appropriations of Hegel in the 20th century, pretty specialized, right? At some point, I was pretty sure I knew more about medical diagnoses of nostalgia in France than anyone alive, because I had read all of the material that there was, and nobody else really cared to read it. But big deal if I can't actually show you Jane Doe, who's interested in something else in the 19th century or is interested in research on depression today, why this stuff on nostalgia matters. I needed my specialization to make the argument. I couldn't just be cavalier about it, because I think it would have been less relevant. It would have been less substantial. On the other hand, specialization wasn't enough. So I think especially for undergraduate institutions, specialization is necessary but not sufficient. What happens in American universities and lots of universities around the world today is that we give up on the translation part. If you're doing biophysics and you really are great and you're making real discoveries, okay, you can't show why it's relevant to anyone else, fine. You don't have to. You're working with graduate students. You're working with people in your field. We don't want to distract you. You're making great progress, right? I understand that. And in specialized research universities, you'll find people like that. And those universities have a very important function. But for institutions that are interested in education and not just research, like Wesleyan and liberal arts schools, finding the people who can make those connections and make the translation, that's where the education catches on fire. Nick Dirks, who's the new chancellor of UC Berkeley, is a Wesleyan alumnus, and I was out there for his inauguration speaking about undergraduate education, liberal arts education, and there was a man on our panel who was a Nobel Prize winner and in astrophysics, I think. And he loved teaching undergraduate classes, because he loved to be able to talk about how his very esoteric and difficult field of work was actually relevant for people who were thinking about how science works and how you get science done. And he was able to talk about this in an interesting way for a non-scientist. When he talks with his peers, his specialization is absolutely crucial, and you can't fake it. The math is the math. And I think similarly at Wesleyan we have people who are great specialists in their fields, whether it's John Finn in constitutional law or Janine Basinger in film, or Laura Grable in biology, just to name a few, that they're great specialists in their field, but they're also interested in sharing that specialization with young people who are still open to discovery in ways that specialization would challenge, would perhaps even inhibit. One of the ways you know you're standing on your own 2 feet is if you're going against the grain. What I'm interested in is how aversive thinking can be pragmatic. Because you can have forms of critical thinking or protest for its own sake, and whatever it is, I'm against it. There's a great Groucho Marx scene. I think it's in Horse Feathers when he's a college president, and it has this great song called "Whatever It Is, I'm Against It." And at Wesleyan, we've had this from time to time. The student body, I think, when I was a student, there's some of that. It's a pleasure to be against things, especially when you're young and the people you're against are old. There's some of that. But I'm really interested in aversive thinking that makes a positive difference. that it's not just showing that you can tear things down, but that you can make a positive difference by going against the grain. And I try to make this argument in the last chapter of the book that critical thinking that we always, praise is really, it's just one ingredient of education. It's not enough. If we just teach our students to be critical, that we don't allow them the pleasures of absorption, of alliance, of solidarity, and that these are also very important virtues of a full education. Sometimes I think of it as the trope of sophistication, to show how smart you are because you can show other people aren't so smart, and that makes you feel sophisticated. In our culture, you get points for that. Irony and being able to dismiss other people gets you certain points. But that kind of sophistication seems to me pernicious. I'd like to see our students and our faculty move from being sophisticated critics to being makers of meaning, to being able to generate values and generate meaning, and not just show that somebody else's meaning isn't all it's cracked up to be. At Wesleyan, for years now, we have people who think they're critics of normativity, and I get that, because what they're saying is I don't want to conform, and that's cool. I like that. I think that's a very important part of liberal education, as I've said. But I think we have to find ways to generate norms that we have confidence in. I don't know that you actually discover norms that were out there. I don't subscribe to that, but to generate norms that people will rally around, will have solidarity with, and that are worth believing in. Probably worth correcting too, as these things are never perfect. But just being able to show something's not perfect is not really enough. I am so impressed by the ways in which Wesleyan alumni do translate the education they have had into the work they're doing. And it's not direct. It's not like they say, well, I had this course in classics and now I'm doing sports management and I'm somehow, taking the lessons of Hector and Achilles. And no, it's not that direct. But it is something they feel in their own lives, that the kind of thinking they began developing at Wesleyan, let's say in classics, does inform their work in sports management or in the law, or the kind of work somebody does in FGSS is informing their politics and their participation in their actions as citizens many years later. And of course, I do meet alumni who are in the education world, for whom Wesleyan remains often the most exciting intellectual experience that they've ever had. I mean, that it was transformative in that way, and they go to graduate school and they get their PhDs, but it was the Wesleyan experience that set them, as Emerson says, set their hearts aflame. The worst thing you can do with a college education is see it as preparation for the worst job you'll ever have, which is the first job you get after college. What you want out of a higher education is a turning of the heart and the mind towards continual learning, so that you're one of the people shaping those changes, whether it's in journalism or in media or in healthcare, that you're retooling yourself and others because you are learning how to adapt and thrive in a context of change. That seems to me really important, and that's not just about rejecting old models. It's about developing new models. It's about seeing opportunity where other people see obstacles. And I think, one of the things we hear at Wesleyan these days is that students want more maker spaces where they can turn their ideas into stuff, into organizations, into material, into objects. And we're creating that in as we think about new campus planning. We will have more spaces for students and faculty to build things, prototype things, and model it out and see how it works, and then in an iterative process make it better. I do think a liberal education it's an iterative process. I mean, in other words, it's I think the last line of the book is something like, when it works, it's never over. That you always can learn more. You can always expand your intellectual and cultural horizons. When people take pleasure in that and thrive by doing that, I think they will shape the changes of the future and not just be victimized by them. There are people who try to reduce complexity or run away from it, and then there are people for whom complexity and ambiguity is the part of the air they breathe or the water they're swimming in. I think of my friend Joshua Boger, who's the chair of the board at Wesleyan, and has, he always told me when we first started working together that he has a high tolerance for ambiguity. And I think entrepreneurs have that. I think scientists have that. They search out, more certainty, but they realize that you don't ever reduce ambiguity away. In fact, the people who really thrive in contexts of change are people who are not frightened by complexity and ambiguity, who see complexity as an opportunity for creativity. It's always great fun to meet alumni from different periods at Wesleyan. I was in France this winter because Kari was giving a lecture at the Sorbonne, and I went over with her and visited our daughter who was there, and we had a reception for some Wesleyan alumni. And I met an alumnus from 1948 who was a playwright, and he came to Wesleyan from France and then went back. So I thought to myself, what could he have in common, right, with the experience of lots of other Wesleyan alumni like myself? I came from Long Island, quite not too far. And so he said to me, well, Wesleyan changed my life, which is a phrase I hear a lot. Wesleyan changed my life because it gave me the courage to be a writer. Now, I've heard this phrase, it gave me the courage to be fill in the blank, so many times, and it makes me so happy to hear it. And so here he is from 1948, and then there are alumni there from 2008 who are saying much the same thing. It gave me the courage to start my own business. It gave me the courage to think for myself. It gave me the tools to pursue this music education, whatever it is, and that they are united in their gratitude and admiration for an institution that prepare students to act on their best selves. This is that Emersonian side. We can act on our worst selves when we're nervous and anxious and afraid of the world, or we can act on our best selves when we're relentless and creative and courageous. And that's what he was describing to me. So when we go around talking about liberal education, I'm really looking forward to hearing how it played out for individual alumni in various cities around the country and perhaps overseas. The book has already been, the translation rights have been bought in Korea. It hasn't come out yet in English, but the Koreans seem to be interested in it. And I'm very interested in, talking to our alumni in Asia, as well as prospective students, about what does liberal education mean in your context. I love talking about Wesleyan, and as a teacher, I'm devoted to this kind of education. So I'm hopeful that over the course of the next year, as we talk about these issues, that I'll continue to learn myself about alma mater and also about education. There's been a battle throughout American history concerning access to education. Wesleyan has been a pioneer, especially from the 1960s onward, in trying to find ways to bring to campus people from groups that have been seriously underrepresented in selective institutions of higher learning. And that is something we should be very proud of. I know I'm very proud of that aspect of the school. Over 200 years, there have been these battles. Who should have a liberal education? Should it be just for wealthy people? Should it be just for white people? Should it just be for men? Should it not be for immigrants? Should it not be for Jews? Et cetera, et cetera. It goes on and on. And, I think Wesleyan's commitment to access is exemplary. I wish we had financial capacity to promote even more scholarships than we have now, and we are working on that. But the commitment to access in a period when a lot of folks are filtering out of higher education institutions, people they think don't belong there, that's very important. And I think we're fighting the good fight for more access. And online education is another mode of access, and we're experimenting with that. And still, we have a long way to go to make the classes as strong as we want them to be. And, a lot of people really believe that in education, in American history, a lot of people have seen freedom as the byproduct of education. Frederick Douglass said that his great lesson was that when he heard the master of the house say that you can't teach this slave to read because reading unfits you for slavery. And that was his big lesson. Education is the ticket to freedom. And I still believe that very strongly. People who are trying to narrow education are trying to limit freedom and push towards conformity. And education, an open, broad, contextual education, gives people greater access to themselves and the world, makes them more free in that sense. And that's something, I think Wesleyan has been committed to and remains committed to.